I should have known something was off when Randall called me out of the blue like that. My uncle wasn't the type to reach out. Hell, I hadn't heard from him in maybe 3 years, not since my dad's funeral. So, when his name showed up on my phone that Tuesday morning, I almost didn't answer. Marvin, his voice sounded same. Gruff. No nonsense. I need you to come up to the farm. I was sitting in my apartment staring at another rejection email from another job I wouldn't get. What's going on? Can't explain over the phone. How soon can you get here? Randall, I don't even know where you live anymore. Somewhere up north, right? I'll text you the address. Pack for a few weeks. A few weeks. I had made $200 in my checking account, and nothing keeping me in town except a lease I couldn't afford. Anyway, what kind of work were you talking about? Farm sitting. I've got to go out of town for a while. Need someone to watch the place? The line went quiet. I could hear some eating in the background. Wind maybe, or static. Marvin, you there? Yeah, I'm here. What's the pay? $500 a week plus room and board. $500 a week to watch an empty farm. I'd been making less than that at the hardware store before they laid me off. When do you need me? Today. I'll explain everything when you get here. The call ended before I could ask anything else. I packed what little I had into 2 duffel bags and threw them in the back of my Honda. The address Randall texted led me north on Highway 12, then onto smaller roads that wound up into the mountains. The kind of roads where you didn't pass another car for 20 minutes at a stretch. My phone lost signal about an hour into the drive. The Honda wheezed on the steeper climbs. I'd bought it for $800 6 months ago, and it showed every mile. The engine knocked when I pushed it too hard, and the radio only picked up static up here. I rolled the windows down and listened to the sound of gravel under the tires. The road got narrower as I climbed higher. Pine trees pressed in on both sides, thick enough that I couldn't see more than a few feet into the woods. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of the valley below, through a gap in the trees. But mostly it was just green and shadow. I started to wonder if I had taken a wrong turn. Somewhere when I saw the mailbox. Plain black metal with gray painted in white letters. A dirt driveway disappeared into the trees beyond it. The driveway was longer than I expected. Maybe half a mile of ruts and potholes that made the Honda bounce and scrape. When I finally came around the last curve, I saw the farmhouse sitting in a clearing maybe 2 acres wide. It wasn't much to look at. 2 stories. White clapboard siding that needed paint. A wraparound porch with a sagging roof. A red barn sat about 50 yards to the left, and I could see a pasture beyond that with black and white cows scattered across it. The whole place had that worn-down look that comes from too much weather and not enough money. Randall was waiting on the porch when I pulled it up. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face had more lines in it, but he still had that same solid build, like he could work all day without breaking a sweat. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Made good time, he said as I got out of the car. GPS took me on some interesting back roads. I grabbed my bags from the trunk. Nice place, Randall grunted. It serves its purpose. Come on, I'll show you around inside. The front door opened into a living room that felt smaller than it looked. From outside, dark wood furniture, a stone fireplace, and windows that didn't let in much light through the pine trees. The whole place smelled like coffee and old wood. Kitchen's through here, Randall said, leading me past a staircase. Bathrooms upstairs along with 2 bedrooms. You can take the one on left. The kitchen was basic. White appliances that had seen better days. A round table with 2 chairs. And a window that looked out toward the barn. Everything was clean, but worn. Not much to it, I said. Like I said, it serves its purpose. Randall opened a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Before I show you the rest, you need to read this. He handed me the paper. It was notebook paper, the kind with the blue lines, and someone had written on it in black ink. The handwriting was careful, like whoever wrote it wanted to make sure every word was clear. He unfolded it and read. Rules 1. Do not go outside between sunset and sunrise. 2. Keep all doors and windows locked after dark. 3. If you hear knocking after 10 p.m., do not answer. Do not look outside. 4. Feed the cows. Every morning at 7 a.m., count them. There should be 12. 5. If you count 13 cows, do not feed them. Come back to the house immediately. I read it twice. What is this? Rules. Randall's voice was flat. You follow them exactly as written. Come on, Randall, what's this really about? He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were gray. Same as mine. Same as me dad's had been. But there was something in them I hadn't seen before. Something that made me stop asking questions. These aren't suggestions, Marvin. Your life depends on following them exactly as they're written. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. My life depends in it. Yes. I looked at the paper again. 13 cows. You just said there were 12. There are 12. Count them every morning when you feed them. If you ever count 13, you didn't feed them. You come straight back to the house and wait until the next day. What happens if I count 13? Randall didn't answer. He took the paper from my hands and folded it again. Keep this with you. Read it every night before bed. Randall, what the hell is going on here? You want the job or not? I needed the money. 500 a week was more than I'd made in a month at any job I'd had. And it wasn't like I had anywhere else to go. Yeah, I want the job. Good. Let me show you the daily routine. We walked outside of the barn. The cows were spread across the pasture, mostly black with white patches. They looked normal enough. I counted them as we walked. 12, just like Randall had said. Feeds in the barn, Hess said, sliding open the big door. 2 scoops per cow, morning and evening. Water troughs are automatic, but check them anyway. Sometimes, the lines freeze. Inside the barn, it smelled like hay and manure. Normal farm smells. Randall showed me where the feed wasted, how much to give them, where to find the tools if I needed to fix anything. Gardens behind the house, he said as we walked back. Tomatoes, corn, beans. Water it if we don't get rain for more than 3 days. Harvest, whatever is ready. How long you going to be gone? Month, maybe 2, depends. Depends on what. But Randall was already walking toward the house. I followed him inside and he went straight upstairs. When he came back down, he was carrying a brown suitcase. My truck's parked behind the barn. Hess said keys are on the kitchen counter if you need to go to town for anything. Nearest grocery store is about 20 minutes down the mountain. Wait, you're leaving now? I've got to catch a flight tonight. He headed for the front door. Remember the rules, Marvin? Followed them exactly. Randall, hold on a second. Buth was already outside walking toward the barn. I heard a truck engine start. Up and a minute later, a blue pickup came around from behind the barn. Randall didn't wave. He just drove down the driveway and disappeared into the... I stood on the porch, listening to the engine fade away. The silence that followed was complete. No traffic, no neighbors, no sounds, except wind in Theatris and the distant ludian of cattle. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket and read the rules again. They still didn't make any sense. I guess I thought the rules were just Randall being paranoid. The first 3 days went by without anything weird happening. I kept busy with the farm work, fixing things that needed fixing, checking on the cows, watering, the garden, normal stuff. I'd worked farms before, and this felt like any other job, except for the pay being better and the location more isolated. I didn't think much about sunset those first few nights. Back home, I'd always worked a done till the job was done. Not until some arbitrary time on a clock. So, when the sun started going down, I just kept working. Had a broken gate latch to fix, then some loose boards on the chicken coop that needed nailing down. The kind of work that takes however long it takes. I'd read those rules each night like Randall told me to. But they seemed like the paranoid ramblings of an old man who'd been alone too long. Don't go outside after dark. I'd been going outside after dark my whole life. Lock all the doors and windows. This was the middle of nowhere. Who was going to break in? A raccoon. The third night he stayed out until almost 10 o'clock, working on a section of fence near the pasture. Used my phone's flashlight to see what I was doing. The cows watched me from about 20 feet away, just standing there chewing and looking bored. Normal cow behavior. I went to bed each night thinking Randall had wasted his time writing down a bunch of nonsense. Maybe he'd had some break-ins years ago and never got over it. Maybe he'd watched too many horror movies. Either way, nothing happened those first 3 nights except me getting the farm in better shape than Eth had probably been in years. The 4th day started the same. I fed the cows at 7, counted 12 like always, then spent the morning working in the garden. The tomatoes needed staking, and there were weeds everywhere. After lunch, I decided to tackle the broken fence rail in the barn I'd been putting off. The rail had snapped clean through, probably from Onaf, the cows leaning against it too hard. I needed to cut a new piece of wood to fit, then bolt it in place. Simple job, but it required measuring twice and cutting once. Like my dad always said, the kind of work you don't rush. I got started around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The barn stayed cool even when it was hot outside, and I had good light coming through the big doors I'd propped open. I measured the gap, marked my cuts, and started working with the handsaw. Motion felt good. Honest work. Time moves different when you're focused on something. I'd measure, cut, test, the fit, then trim a little more. The wood was old and hard, and the saw moved slow through it. I stopped a couple times to sharpen the blade and wipe the sweat off my hands. I was so focused on getting the rail toe fit exactly right that I didn't notice when the light coming through the barn doors started getting dimmer. Didn't notice the shadows getting longer. I just kept working, determined to finish the job. It wasn't until I looked up to rest my arms that I realized the sun had gone down. The barn doors showed nothing but darkness outside. Complete darkness. The kind you only get in places without street lights or house lights or any lights at all. I checked me phone. 8:45. I'd been working in the dark for at least an hour using just the weak overhead bulb in the barn. Hadn't even noticed. That's when I heard it. A low moaning sound coming from somewhere in the woods. Not like an animal in pain, but deeper than that. Longer. It rose and fell like wind, but there wasn't any wind. The air was completely still. I stopped moving and listened. The sound came again from a different direction this time. Still that same low moan, but definitely from the woods, on the other side of the barn. My hands were still holding the fence rail I'd been fitting into place. I set it down carefully, trying not to make noise. The moaning sound came a third time, and now it seemed closer. Not right outside the barn, but closer than before. That's when I remembered the first rule. Do not go outside between sunset and sunrise. I'd been outside for almost an hour after sunset. The moaning came again, and this time I heard something else with it. Footsteps, heavy ones moving through the woods. Not quick, light steps of a deer, or the shuffling of a raccoon. These sounded deliberate, slow, like something big was walking between the trees, taking its time. The footsteps circled around toward the front of the barn. I could track their movement by the sound of branches breaking and leaves rustling. Whatever was making them wasn't trying to be quiet. I looked at the tools scattered around me. Hand saw, hammer, box of bolts, measuring tape. None of them seemed like much protection against whatever was walking around outside. The barn doors were wide open, and I was standing right in the light where anything outside could see me. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No moaning, no footsteps. No sound at all except my own heartbeat in my ears. Then I heard them again, but closer. Much closer. Right outside the barn doors. I grabbed my tools as quietly as I could and stuffed them in the toolbox. My hands were shaking and I dropped the hammer twice before getting it inside. The sound echoed in the barn like a gunshot. The footsteps started moving again. They were circling the barn now, slow and deliberate. I could hear them moving along their side wall, then around to the back, then along the other side. Whatever was out there was taking its time, walking all the way around the building. I thought about the second rule. Keep all doors and windows locked. After dark, the barn doors were wide open. I was standing high in a pool of light that could be seen from anywhere in the woods. And something was walking around outside, taking its time, maybe deciding what to do next. I turned off the overhead light. T-burn went completely dark, and I had to feel my way toward the doors. I bumped into a hay bale and nearly tripped over a bucket, but I made it to the front of the barn. The footsteps had stopped. Pentagon, I peered around the edge of the doorframe and looked outside. At first, I couldn't see anything except darkness. Then my eyes started to adjust and I could make out the shape of trees against the slightly lighter sky. That's when I saw them moving. Dark shapes between the trees, taller than they should be, and wrong somehow, angular. They moved like they were walking upright, but they were too tall to be people and the wrong shape to be bears. One of them stepped out from behind a tree about 50 feet away. It stood there for a moment, and I could see it was looking toward the barn, looking toward me. I pulled my head back and pressed myself against the inside wall of the barn. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might give me away. The footsteps started again, but faster now. They were coming toward the barn. I grabbed the barn doors and pulled them closed, as quietly as I could. The hinges creaked, but I got them shut and dropped the wooden bar across them. It wouldn't stop anything determined to get in, but it was better than nothing. The footsteps reached the barn doors and stopped right outside. I backed away from the doors and tried to control my breathing. The toolbox was still in my hands, and I set it down carefully. Then I heard scratching. Something was dragging claws or fingernails down the outside of the barn doors. I needed to get to the house. There was a back door to the barn that led to a small equipment yard. I felt my way through the darkness, moving between hay bales and farm equipment, trying not to bump into anything. The scratching at the front doors continued, joined by that low, moaning sound. I found the back door and eased it open. The equipment yard was empty, just some old machinery and a pile of lumber. Beyond that was open ground between the barn and the house. Maybe 60 feet of nothing but grass. I could see the house clearly. Randall had left the porch light on, and it looked warm and safe and very far away. The scratching stopped. I listened for footsteps, trying to figure out where they'd gone. Nothing. The silence was worse than the noise had been. He took a deep breath and ran. 60 feet had never felt so long. I sprinted across the open ground, expecting to hear footsteps behind me, or feel something grab me from the darkness. The porch light got bigger and brighter, and then I was at the kitchen door, fumbling with the handle. It was locked. He'd locked it when I left for the barn, following habit more than thinking about it. Now I couldn't get in, and I could hear footsteps again coming around the side of the house. I dug the key out of my pocket and got the door open, just as something large moved past the corner of my vision. I slammed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt, then ran through the house, checking every window and door. All locked. I'd done that muck right at least. I went to the kitchen window and looked out toward the barn. At first, I didn't see anything. Then shapes moved between the trees again, tall and wrong, and definitely not any animal I could name. They stayed in the tree line, just dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. I watched for maybe an hour before they disappeared back into the woods. Then I sat at the kitchen table and read those rules again, understanding for the first time that Randall hadn't been paranoid at all. When morning came, I went out to check the barn. The wooden siding next to the main doors was gouged with deep scratches, like something with very long claws had tried to tear its way inside. I made sure to finish everything before dark this time. The cows were fed, watered, and locked in the barn by 6:30. I'd checked the latch twice, tested the door to make sure it wouldn't budge, and even walked around the whole building, looking for gaps or weak spots. Nothing was getting in or out of that barn without a key. The rules were starting to make sense now. Not the why fit, but the importance of following them exactly. I'd learned that lesson 3 nights ago, when I had worked past sunset and heard things moving in the woods, things that left claw marks on the barn siding. I ate a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, then sat at the kitchen table reading a paperback I'd found on the living room shelf. Some old western about cattle rustlers. The irony wasn't lost on me, sitting here guarding livestock from whatever lived in these mountains. Around 10:30, I went upstairs and got ready for bed. My room faced the barn and pasture, which I'd started thinking of as an advantage. I could keep an eye on things without going outside. The window gave him a clear view of the barn doors and most of the fenced area. I pulled the curtains closed and settled into bed with the book. The house was quiet except for the usual settling sounds and wind in the trees. Normal sounds that didn't make my skin crawl anymore. Sleep came easier than it had the first week. My body had adjusted to the physical work in the mountain air. Even my mind had started to accept the strangeness of this place. I was learning to live rules I didn't understand in a world that operated with different logic than anything I'd known before. But something woke me around midnight. A sound that didn't belong. Not the moaning from the woods or heavy footsteps that had terrified me before. This was closer, familiar, but wrong. The creak of hinges, metal on metal, slow and deliberate. I lay still for a moment, listening. The sound came again, longer this time, like a door swinging open. The barn door. I sat up and pushed the curtains aside just now to peer out. The barn sat 60 feet away, a dark rectangle against this slightly lighter sky. But something was different about its shape. The doors that should have been closed and latched were standing wide open. That wasn't possible. I'd locked them myself, tested the latch, made sure everything was secure. Then I saw movement in the darkness beyond the barn doors. A pallid shape emerging from the black interior. Then another, and another. The cows were walking out of the barn. I pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. All 12 of them moved in a slow, steady line through the open doors and into the pasture. But they weren't wandering randomly like cattle do when they escaped. They moved with purpose, each one following the exact path of the one before it. They walked in perfect formation across the pasture toward the far fence line. No hurrying, not stopping to graze, just walking in a straight line like soldiers in parade. I'd never seen cows behave like that. Cattle are herd animals, sure, but they don't move in formation. They mill around. Some go left, some go right, some stop to eat grass. They don't march, but these 12 were marching. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and headed for the door. Whatever washer painting out there. I needed to get those cows back in the barn before something in the woods got to them. My hand was on the doorknob when I stopped. The rules. Rule number 2 specifically. I couldn't remember the exact wording, but it was something about not going outside after dark. and there'd been something else. Something about the cows. I went back to the bed and found folded paper in my jeans pocket. My hand shook a little as I opened it and read by flashlight. Rule number 4. Feed the cows every morning at 7 a.m. and count them. There should be 12. Rule number 5. If you count 13 cows, do not feed them and return to the house immediately. But nothing about what to do if they got out at night. Nothing about whether I should go after them or let them wander. Then I read rule number 1 again. Do not go outside between sunset and sunrise. No exceptions listed. No emergency clauses. Just don't go outside. I folded the paper and went back to the window. The cows had reached the fence line at the far end of the pasture, maybe 100 yards from the house. They stood there in their perfect line, all facing the same direction, facing through woods. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see what they were looking at. The tree line was just a black wall from this distance, but something was different about one section of it. A gap between two large pines, where the darkness seemed deeper. And in that gap, something moved. It was too far away to make out details, but I could see it was tall, much taller than a person. It stood upright, but its proportions were wrong somehow. Too thin in some places, too wide in others, like someone had taken a human shape and stretched it in random directions. The figure raised what might have been an arm, and Thicos began moving again, not toward the barn, toward the woods. They walked in their same perfect formation, following the fence line until they reached the gate that led to the dirt road. The gate that I knew was latched and secured because I'd checked it myself that afternoon. But as the first cow approached it, the gate swung open. I watched 12 cows walk through that gate in single file and disappear into the woods. The tall figure waited until the last one passed, then melted back into the shadows between the trees. The gate swung shut behind them. He stood at the window for another hour, waiting for something else to happen. Waiting for the cows to come back, or for more sounds from the woods, or for that thing to reappear. But the night went quiet again. Even the wind died down, leaving nothing but silence, an empty pasture. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair by the window, flashlight on my lap, watching the barn doors that hung open like a mouth, wondering how a locked latch had opened by itself, wondering what that thing in the woods wanted with Randall's cattle, wondering if I'd still have a job when Randall came back and found his livestock gone. When the sun finally came up around 6:30, I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the empty pasture. The barn doors were still open, the gate still closed, no sign of the cows anywhere. I was trying to figure out how to explain this to Randall when I heard a sound that made me spill hot coffee on my hand. The barn door was creaking again. He looked out the window and saw them walking back through the open doors. All 12 cows moving in that same manner. They filed into the barn one by one, then settled into their usual spots, as if nothing had happened. By 7 a.m. when I went out to do the morning feeding, they were all there. I counted twice to be sure. 12 cows, all accounted for, chewing hay, and looking at me with those placid buoyant expressions that gave away nothing. The barn door latch was secure and locked, just like I'd left it night before. I'd been working in the garden for about an hour when I saw it. The deer stood at treeline, maybe 30 feet away, right where the cleared ground met the forest. Nothing unusual about that, I thought at first. Deer wandered through this property all the time, but this one didn't move. It straightened up from the tomato plants I'd been weeding and wiped my hands on my jeans. The deer just stood there looking at me. Not the quick, nervous glances deer usually gave before bolting. This was different. It stared right at me with those black eyes. Head turned in me direction, ears forward. I waited for it to run. That's what deer do when they spot people. They freeze for maybe a second, then bound away through the trees with those white tails, flicking, but this one stayed put. The longer I looked at it, the more wrong it seemed. The animal stood perfectly still like a statue. No ear twitching, no head movement, no shifting weight from one leg to another. Just that steady, unblinking stare. My skin started to crawl. I'd seen plenty of deer in my life. They're skittish creatures, always ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. They don't stand around staring at humans. Daisy or don't hold eye contact for more than a few seconds. This one had been watching me for at least 2 minutes now. I took a step to the left, moving along the garden row. The deer's head turned, following my movement. Those black eyes never left my face. The rest of its body stayed motionless, but its neck rotated to track me. That swine. I remembered the rules. I'd read them so many times now that I had them memorized. But one rule I'd pushed to the back of my mind. Rule number 3, the one that seemed the most random. the most out of place with others. If you see a deer on the property during daylight hours, shoot it immediately. At the time, it hadn't made much sense. Deer were harmless. Why would Randall want them killed? I'd figured maybe they damaged his crops or something. People had different relationships with wildlife than city folks did. But looking at this deer now, with its natural stillness and that penetrating stare, the rule didn't seem random anymore. I started backing toward the house, moving slowly and keeping my eyes on the animal. Each step I took, its head turned a little more to follow me. The black eyes never wavered, never blinked that I could see. The rifle hung above the fireplace in the living room. Randall had shown it to me on that first day, along with a box of ammunition in the kitchen drawer. He'd said I might need it for predators or sick animals. I'd nodded and figured I'd probably never touch the thing. My back hit Fipper's steps. I fumbled behind me for the railing. Still, watching the deer, it watched me back. When I reached the kitchen door, I had to turn around to get my key out, and for those few seconds when I couldn't see the animal, my hands shook. The lock turned. I pushed inside and went straight to the room. The rifle was a bolt-action hunting rifle. Nothing fancy, but well-maintained. I'd handled guns before, though not often. My dad had taken me hunting a few times when I was younger. The basics came back to me as I lifted it down from the hooks. In the kitchen, I found the ammunition box in the drawer next to the sink. My hands were steadier now that I had something to do, a plan to follow. I loaded 3 rounds into the magazine, worked the bolt to chamber 1, and clicked the safety off. The whole process took maybe 2 minutes. I went back outside, expecting to find an empty tree line, hoping for it. Actually, maybe the deer had won. While I was inside, maybe I'd imagined how wrong it looked. Maybe this was all just paranoia from spending too much time alone on this isolated farm. But the deer hadn't moved. It stood in exactly the same spot, in exactly the same position. Head turned toward the house now, those black eyes fixed on me as I came down porch steps with a rifle. I walked back toward the garden, keeping the gun pointed down but ready. The deer's gaze followed me. When I stopped about 20 feet away, we stared at each other across the cleared ground. Up close, I could see more details that bothered me. Its coat was the right color, brown with white markings. Its size looked normal for a white-tailed doe. The shape was right, but something about the proportions seemed off in a way I couldn't put my finger on. And those eyes were too dark, too deep, like looking into wells. "Go on," I said out loud. "Get out of here." The deer didn't react to my voice, didn't even twitch an ear. It raised the rifle and sighted down the barrel. The deer's chest filled the scope. At this range, I couldn't miss, but I hesitated. Finger on the trigger. It was just standing there, not threatening me, not charging, not showing any aggression, just watching. Maybe it was sick. Maybe it was confused. Maybe there was a perfectly normal explanation for its behavior. But the rule was clear. Shoot any deer in sight. Randall had written those rules for a reason. Everything else on that paper had turned out to be necessary. The creatures in the woods, the midnight visits, the barn doors open and by themselves, all of it real. If Randall said to shoot deer on sight, there was reason for that, too. I took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against my shoulder. The shot echoed across the clearing and bounced off the trees. Birds scattered from the branches, wings beating frantically as they took flight. I'd aimed for the chest center mass. An easy shot at 20 feet. The bullet should have dropped the deer instantly, but the deer didn't fall. Instead, it started to dissolve. The brown fur turned black, then gray, then transparent. The solid shape of the animal began to break apart, like smoke caught in a strong wind. The edges blurred first, then the whole body started coming apart in wisps and tendrils. Within seconds, there was nothing left but dark smoke drifting between the trees. The wind caught it and scattered it, pulling the last traces apart until they disappeared completely. No blood on the ground. No body. No sign that anything had ever stood there. He lowered the rifle and stared at the empty space where the deer had been. I went back to the house and set Therafall against the wall next to the kitchen door. My hands were still shaking a little from what I'd just seen, or what I thought I'd seen. The deer that wasn't really a deer. I made myself a sandwich and ate it, standing at the